Good evening, sir.
Good evening. 1 second, I need to get my headphones sorted.
Where are you joining us from?
I am in Virginia currently.
Nice.
Been bouncing all over the country. Just got back from Omaha. Was out there speaking at a conference that went quite well, at the Bitcoin Day conference. Hey, Vallis is in.
How many people were present there?
So the Bitcoin Day conference is kind of cool. They had multiple rooms running at once, and they were trying to target drawing in like industry professionals in a few different industries. And being in Nebraska, right in the middle of farming country, they were anticipating having some agriculture people in. So I had that pool of people, and then a couple of the different rooms were a couple of different industries. I think I probably had about 40 people. So it was a nice little intimate conversation where I was able to kind of interact with the audience. I kind of pulled them all to see like where their backgrounds were. And it was pretty interesting. I had a good mix of people that were hardcore Bitcoiners, complete newbies, people that were like mainstream industrial agriculture people that were there because they were starting to get curious about Bitcoin, about the conversations happening around it. It was quite the interesting place to talk about it with that diverse of an audience.
What was a key insight or key takeaway, and what was the interesting part were the special questions?
The thing that shocked me was how little pushback I got from the mainstream agriculture people that were in the room with us. A lot of times in the farming community, when you try to talk about the problems of the long time preference stuff happening with the soil, you get a lot of pushback because they had this sense of guilt where I've destroyed my soil and I don't want to own that I've done that because it's a sunk cost fallacy, just like salty Bitcoiner syndrome. Right? But it was really interesting because in this conversation, I approached it very first and foremost talking about like what is money, and then I pulled the audience for like what are the problems you're seeing on the ground in agriculture. And from that perspective, they kind of explained to me the stuff they're seeing happening that's starting to make them worry. And I took it and I explained this big picture incentive issue where money is the communication mechanism for what we think the value is supposed to be when we engage to collaborate and add value to the world where we're creating. And from that area, it created this impression of we've been tricked. We didn't realize the market was telling us something that was just flat wrong. And so it leapfrogged over top of that farmer guilt and got everybody right in this paradigm of, okay, there's this problem where we all were building on a bad foundation. How do we fix the foundation with Bitcoin, get rid of all that bad information, and get back to kind of fixing this problem together? So that shocked me. I thought I'd have to spend like 10, 20 minutes of my talk dealing with that dynamic. We covered it in probably 2 minutes and just got right into solutions, which is beautiful. Bitcoin just seems to align people behind defining the problem clearly, which is usually where all the effort has to go.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Everyone is on board. So I will do a very quick introduction and then hand over to John. John, you can speak in here.
Yep, I'm good.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome. This is a little teaser for our panel that is going to take place on September 21st in exactly 1 week. And we would warmly invite everyone, each and everyone, to join. It's called Superb Summit for Understanding Price Economics and the Revolution of Bitcoin. We've been working hard, and final week. So all join us. We have some free tickets for those who don't want to spend sets. Just watch out on our social media. And that's about it for the promotion. I'm very excited. I have some questions myself, but John, I think you can maybe introduce the speakers for those who are not familiar with this whole space. And yeah, let's kick it off.
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say I consider myself lucky to be invited to this panel and this spaces because, I'm the non-farmer among the four of us. And, I've dug into this with all three of the guys on my podcast. And it's it's an issue that I think is incredibly important and incredibly interesting. And the response from the shows that I've done with the guys, and I know they've been on other shows, I think has borne that out, in that a lot of people are very interested in, broadly speaking, food independence, but also how our relationship with food and the land can help to regenerate, our environments and provide healthy, strong, independent, sovereign environments for ourselves and for our families. And so, I think these conversations are the very beginning of, this Citadel talk that we are having in the space. And I think it's super important, and more important every day as, the constraints of, let's say, the legacy fiat system impose themselves more and more upon us. So I'm super stoked to be here. I don't think I'll introduce the boys. They can probably do that much better than me. So I'll just proof that you're the next one up in my screen. So why don't you go for it?
Hey, yeah, my name is Poof, and I'm honored to be on the panel with you guys. And I am in transition. Actually, I grew up very much in a fiat farming operation, and worked for a operation where we actually take the mega dairies. We were raising the baby calves from the mega dairies, and we're raising them as a baby calves. They came in, and we raised them to as heifer replacements. And so I'm in transition now. I quit that job and kind of in transition. So yeah, grew up a farmer and kind of doing kind of what the fiat bankers or the fiat economists have to do to learn Bitcoin. You have to unlearn the fiat economy or the economics to learn about Bitcoin. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm unlearning some of the things that were ingrained into me and growing up, and how we just always done it, and can transitioning more into a holistic approach. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I got my own beef herd. I've had it for 4 years, and I started 3 years ago. Started to do regenerative grazing, and it's amazing the differences that I see in my grass and my soil, um, and in the cows. Yeah, it's exciting. I'm kind of taking, Bitcoin's a giant rabbit hole, and so soil and regenerative and holistic approaches to farming is another rabbit hole, and food in general really is. But and so I'm going down both. I don't know if it's healthy or not, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I have a little farm, 22-acre farm, located in Michigan, and yeah, that's kind of my story. Really, kind of in the transition part, and unlearning and relearning is kind of where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Untapped, you want to go?
Sure. So I'm Untapped Growth. A lot of you guys probably know me from the podcast I've done with Marty and John. When I got tapped on the shoulder to come talk with Bitcoin Club for the little online conference they're doing, I immediately was thinking like I wanted to bring in these guys with me. It's just such a beautiful synergy to bring all these different backgrounds together to have these conversations versus me standing there and monologuing. So I was pretty stoked when they let me just turn it into a panel rather than me being a single speaker. Um, I don't really think I need to give too much of an update. What do you think, John?
I think people are familiar with you, and if not, they will be by the end of this spaces. So that's good. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, my name is Tim. I grew up on a mixed farm and cattle ranch in Saskatchewan, Canada. My dad was a farmer his whole life, and he really started in the just kind of the commodity world of farming, the fiat world, the way that farming is always done. Um, but just by nature of him being just a really inquisitive person and wanting to figure things out differently, seeing a lot of the problems that he was having with producing crops that he could not sell into the market at a price that would cover his costs, um, he just started looking at alternatives. And this was back in the day before the internet. Um, I just remember him on the phone with just people all over the United States and Canada, just learning what he could learn. He started farming differently. He started um, doing what we would call now regenerative agriculture. At the time, 20, 25 years ago, it didn't really have a name yet. It was just kind of rebel farmers doing things that all the other farmers around them looked at and thought were stupid. Um, and he just tinkered and experimented and moved into this phase where he eventually seeded all of his cropland back to grass, and runs. He's still there farming, running herds of cattle on the land, regenerating the land every year, increasing his carrying capacity, improving the soil and his grass every year. And I just kind of grew up in that environment, not really knowing really anything different than that. Seeing the changes that he was implementing, seeing how they were working, and so just being very blessed to have that experience and be able to take that now where I work. Work for a group of farmers in sales and marketing capacity, helping them implement these systems that we can market and help to move their products into markets with regeneratively farmed labels on them. Basically just still working kind of within the fiat system, but allowing them to get more of a premium for the things that they produce based on the style of farming that they do. Folks are seeing a value in that. And then it was really, my introduction to Bitcoin has been this year, and it's been through John, Joel, and Poof. And I immediately saw the value proposition with Bitcoin. I'm sure we'll get into this in this conversation, but seeing the major issues in agriculture as they currently are. Just as an example, if a farmer grows an animal, say a beef cow, and if he were to take that beef cow to market in 1975 and say he were able to sell it for $2,500, he would take home roughly $1,600 of that animal, the value of that sold animal. Today, that farmer takes that animal to market, sells it for $2,500, and his take home is about $875. And so the farmer is just in this place where he's getting completely squeezed out of the market, completely, can't pay his bills, is just squeezed by the restraints of the system around him. And on top of that, then there's this huge monetization of land where, farmland is becoming one of the last stores of value for people with money. They want to park their money in something that's secure and that feels safe, even if it's not a huge ROI. So it just spikes the price of land. And the farmer looks at that and says, well, this is, the first real money I've seen my whole life. I'm going to go ahead and sell out and maybe rent back the land and keep farming the way I'm farming, or potentially just sell out to kind of a mega corp or a large farm that just comes in and continues to strip mine the land as farming happens. So seeing Bitcoin as a solution to this, as a real store of value that can reduce the monetization of land and allow land to be priced back at a basically based on the productive value of the land, be priced in that kind of category, goes a tremendous way in allowing farmers to have a business, to regenerate the land, to ensure that there's land here for generations to come, and carry on their farming traditions. So long intro, John, but just to recap on where I've come from and how I got into Bitcoin space.
Yeah, I love it, man, and it's so good to have you in here and contributing to this. Less than a year after you've gone down the rabbit hole. I mean, it really just speaks to how compelling all of this is when the pieces start coming together. And as Poof was saying, like, there's multiple on this topic in particular. There's multiple rabbit holes converging at once, and there's some of the most important rabbit holes, right? Your food and your sustenance, your relationship to your environment and the earth. There's obviously a massive spiritual component to your food sustenance and how you raise it and your relationship to it. And then, of course, the Bitcoin aspect and the money aspect that corrects a lot of the incentives, as you were just referring to, that create all these perversions in the market, that increase the price of land, that put more production pressure on the farmers to get more out of the land quicker because of the rate of change. And there's so much here. I mean, we could do 100 of these series and just scratch the surface. But I think I'd love to maybe elaborate on that particular point about how the fiat perversion, the perverse incentives that fiat creates, how that has perverted how farming happens and how it has put stress on farmers and how they go about doing their work. And I know Untapped, you've talked about that before, so maybe you're a good one. And I see your hand up, so why don't you go for it?
That was exactly the end I used to talk about it at the conference with a bunch of the industry professionals that were there. Is I opened with the topic of what is money. Money is meant to be the distributed communication mechanism of two things. It's what is desired by people in the marketplace even people that I don't know and touch directly. It gives me the ability to hear their signal across space and time. And it's also communication about who is best suited to fulfill that desire. What it speaks about is energy efficiency. So it's a fusion of language and fire, if you want to think about it, of the ability to communicate with people about what you want and need and how to collaborate together, but also it's a communication about the energy factor of who should be applying themselves where in that process to fulfill that desire as a collaborative team as a whole, distributed across the whole marketplace. And when we started breaking those down with the industry professionals, you realize just how corrupted that communication mechanism is. Poof, Tim, let's chime in quick here and just like define what are some of the places where that miscommunication is happening.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I mean, one of those big ones is in, we'll take like the size of animal right now. Okay, so in the commercial world, for say taking a livestock to market, they want this huge framed animal that has a ton of meat on it, has a big frame, so that when it goes into a feedlot, it can pack on the pounds and has the bone structure and the frame to eat corn and barley, soybean meal, the things that they feed it, and pack on a whole bunch of weight. Okay, what that does, a perverse incentive that creates on the farmer end, is then he goes and selects genetics. They're these big, huge cows. They require a big bull. And what it does is it increases all of his feed costs, because every pound of weight that you increase in size of the animal, the more feed you have to feed them. So the farmer is left in this end with, he is trying to produce this animal that the market is requiring of him. If he produces something smaller, it's going to get discounted at auction. So he's going to get punished, basically. So the perverse incentive there is it's creating this massive cow that does not work well in a pasture system. The genetics are all wrong for finishing on grass, which takes a little bit longer and a little bit slower process. But it's a smaller genetic animal. It requires less input than what the market is forcing him to produce to go into a feedlot.
So the question would be, where did that incentive originally come from? Do you have any insight on that, Poof?
You mean as far as the incentive of like just efficiency, or like basically efficiency at all costs, not measuring anything else? Is that kind of what you're wondering?
And where did the incentive come from to chase cheaper feed rather than have a cow be a cow?
Oh, right. Yeah, so I was very much involved in this. Okay, so it's very hard to actually feed a cow out. What I mean by that is getting it in as a 5-weight or 6-weight, feeding it with corn and soybean meal. The margins are actually becoming so thin that you have to use fiat food waste to basically increase the margins. And so there is a lot of I just call it fiat food waste. Basically, it's the best way of summing it up. Anything from Skittles, donuts, and gas station foods that is outdated, that gets all ground up with the plastic bags and the cardboard and everything gets all ground up, and that's one source. So yeah, basically, without the fiat food industry feeding out the cattle, and I'm talking about all grain fed. I'm not talking about the grass fed. This would be getting them at 4 or 5 weights and feeding them all the way out. So that's very much happening, and so that's a false feedback loop. Due to the fiat food is the only reason that works.
So the question is like,
yeah, and
here, let me hit this one real quick, John. So the question is like, how do we get in the situation in the first place? I would argue it all started because of the money being controlled by a centralized government entity. So we got put into this paradigm where they, with their regulations, were causing problems for the farmers. Their solutions to the problems that their regulations were causing is let's start doing subsidies. the subsidies skewed the incentive of the monetary signal of what was the most efficient energy usage of effort of productions. So it creates, Tim's been hammering on this a lot recently with a lot of his tweets. We talked about it some last time we were with John. But it creates this communication mechanism that's essentially a lie. It's a lie about where the efficiency lies. Let's circle back to that in a second, Tim. But what it did is it created this incentive where everybody thought we needed cattle that were good at being waste processors, not cattle that are good at being cows, which is just wrong. Because when you use an animal for what the animal is actually best suited at is when you're most efficient. But we, due to this false monetary incentive, turned our cows into pigs. And they're not good at being pigs, which is why you have this competitive dynamic now that's starting to show more of the flaws of it in the system of people saying, why are we using cows for this? They're not as efficient as pork and chicken at being waste consumers. Well, they're never meant to be waste consumers. So it's this propagation of misinformation that starts first with the money that eventually leads to this giant race to the bottom of doing things that are just seemingly completely inane that make you wonder, how did you end up here? That'd be a good thing to roll into a Tim, John, but I'll hand it back to you.
That's actually, kind of a perfect lead into what I was going to say. And it's just that all of these things create this, effectively horrendous situation that you just articulated. And then the kind of conceit that arises, or the false perception that arises from this misinformation, is that this is the only way it can be done, right? So like, this is the only way to be competitive, these big, massive factory farms. And therefore, whatever deleterious effects are noticed from that solution as it exists, i.e. factory farms, whether it be pollution or, environmental degradation or whatever, are therefore unavoidable. And therefore, in order to fix those unavoidable outcomes, we actually have to do away with meat entirely, right? This is part of the argument of, let's say, the anti-meat crowd. And not only is it a representation of the just abject, overly simplistic thinking of our time, but it is part of the conceit of fiat, right? The mirage that fiat creates that causes people to mischaracterize and misdiagnose problems. And so, it's so insidious, right? It is in the cost of land. It is in the monetary premium that nearly everything in a society is bestowed on everything as a result of the failing money, right? Whether that be any of your inputs and all the things that you just mentioned, Untapped. So like, maybe if we, how would you guys respond to what I think is probably a widely held notion, and you hear it often, is that, well, you know, we can't feed the world through the methods that you're describing. What assumptions are being made that are wrong in that assessment, or in that point of view?
Yeah, I can jump in here. We see that criticism a lot, and it really comes back to this idea of subsidies, right? Because the U.S. government, particularly, has subsidized three major crops in the United States: corn, soybeans, and wheat. Okay, they've created this worldwide, almost dependence on cheap food. It's obviously manifest in the United States by the myriad of fake food products that are on the market, from corn syrup to various kinds of Cheerios and everything in between. All over the world, it's created a basically a way where all of the food is just mispriced based on, say, the price of wheat. Okay, and then it creates such a glut and an excess that then, as Untapped was already saying, and Poof was mentioning this too, it has all that excess then on top of the subsidized crops has to go into animal feed. And so then we have to create animals to eat the food that's created from the excess that started with the subsidies. Now, looping that back to your question, John, the world is very dependent on subsidies from the United States right now. And, I think that I'm of the opinion that if the U.S. cut off what it's doing cold turkey, okay, it would be a bad thing for the world. But that being said, the productive capacity of the land is all there. And when we get back to the soil and increasing and helping the microbial life in the soil to take over from what the synthetic inputs are trying to do currently and doing a very poor job at. What that does is it increases the long-term productivity and capacity of the land to feed our local communities. Okay. And when we start to just kind of view the problem from a different perspective, rather than we are responsible for keeping the world fed with cheap food, it's rather this question of let's help communities in various places in the world, starting with our own communities, to feed ourselves. And let's do that through making sure that our food sovereignty is secure where we are, and we are increasing the productive capacity of the land so that as generations go on, there's more and more security there because we're building this bank of soil fertility.
I don't have much to add to that question besides the book called "The Sacred Cow" by Diana Rogers. That is a very good book. She dives into that question in depth, a whole chapter on it. And so I would encourage anybody that wants a really in depth answer. She covers that very well in that book, "The Sacred Cow" by Diana Rogers.
Is that the one with Rob Wolf, Poof?
Correct. Yeah, that's the one with Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers. Yep.
I would answer that question really simply with just a paradigm shift. Fiat incentivizes consumption and moving faster at all costs. We see this in so many different ways of this high time preference where we just strip mine things. We pull out all the resources we can, we leave a zombie company behind and sell it. We do it to the soil too. And if you look at our world as a whole, so many areas of our globe used to be green and now they're just deserts. We've been incentivized to strip everything out of it. And this didn't just start with fiat, but we've been incentivized to strip everything out of it with a high time preference and not be stewards of its long-term productive capacity and respect to the energy production capable of it. Like I love how Salatin talks about it. Like, let a pig be a pig, let a cow be a cow, let a chicken be a chicken. With the incentives that have been created where we've essentially turned our cows into pigs of these giant trash dumps, they're not good at being cows anymore. We've had this problem in regenerative agriculture where we took these cows that have been modernized, you throw them on a bunch of grass and ask them to be cows like they used to be, and now they have trouble with their health. They're not very fertile, they don't breed very well, they don't maintain body condition very well. And this miscommunication in the monetary layer has caused all these stacks of inefficiencies. And Bitcoin I love what Svetsky's been hammering on about this. Bitcoin is energy money. The difference between a currency that's grounded on energy is it's tied to reality in your decision making again, with a respect to efficiency, because there's a true energy cost in everything. So fiat has got no marginal cost of production, right? You can just print it with the touch of a button. So this shift between a paper currency and an energy money is going to create an entire change in our relationship to how we view the price of wasted energy. And if you look at our globe as a whole, I mean, there's wasted energy and inefficiencies of how we do business due to miscommunications, subsidies, and these stacked long time frame mistakes with like cattle genetics and the way that industry is built with feedlots versus small farms with local distribution and so on and so forth. But you also just think about our respect for energy as the planet as a whole. So like we have these places that are these giant deserts that don't have much plant and greenage on them. The subsidy market tells us, like, let's go put solar panels and convert the sun energy into electrical energy. But that's really a market that only exists because of the broken monetary system of the subsidies being paid out to these electricity producers for solar panels with carbon offsets. The more efficient usage of the solar energy would be to fix the soil, capture it with plants, which are orders of magnitude more efficient in converting that energy not into electrical energy from solar, but into soil, which is a built-up life form that has potential production for later, but also caloric energy for the cattle. So there's enough potential green space when you run the numbers to green, like, say, one of the deserts on our planet, one of the big ones like the Sahara Desert, to feed the whole world. So even if you just ignore the productive increase by 2, 3, or 4x of repairing the soil with a low time preference, and how that actually enables you to enhance flows of your caloric output for today while building stocks of potential caloric output for tomorrow by not having to strip mine with such a super low time preference and having clear communication about what the market actually needs and where the efficiencies lies on longer time scales. But it actually is going to incentivize us through this monetary paradigm shift to respect energy different in the world as a whole, to keep things in their proper energy form, even respect to calories, soil, greenery, food, and electrical energy. So all these things are connected, and there's layers upon layers of reasons that this is a good way to feed the planet that stacks right on top of each other.
It's extremely well said, brother, and yeah, beautifully said. Do you think that the regenerative agriculture approach to, let's say, cattle, uh, could it be competitive without Bitcoin? And I'll clarify that a little bit. I know it can be successful in pockets, and there's been small regen ag farms for years, but the more the fiat unravel happens, and the more the perverse incentives permeate, and the more the intervention is permitted uh, through the money, then even if you have a preference for the environmental component of regen ag, or the health component of the food itself, or whatever it may be, the price pressure just forces you to make a decision that's, let's say, counter to your primary preference. However, with the introduction of Bitcoin, then an individual is able to insulate themselves from that price pressure that might otherwise influence their preferences, right? Because if they have Bitcoin on their personal balance sheet, then their world is becoming increasingly inexpensive, right? And so the relative change between the, the product that a regen ag farmer is able to produce and their, fiat, uh, the fiat alternative is minimized. And then the regen ag farmer themselves are able to compete more effectively if they have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And so I guess the question is, do you guys think that it's necessary for Bitcoin to be involved in this equation for us to really see the type of positive change we're discussing in this domain, or is it just a catalyst or accelerant?
Just to let you know, John, your service got a little rough there for the last 20 seconds. It'd probably be good to repeat that question.
Okay. Yeah. The question was just, is it, we've seen regen ag in pockets. Is it possible for this model to work absent Bitcoin, or is it necessary for both customer and producer to have Bitcoin on the balance sheet for this change in our relation to meat, for example, in this case, our food, really take place? So is it necessary, or is it just an accelerant or a catalyst?
I think we should pull that question to Poof, Tim, and me. I mean, first and foremost, there's this interesting dynamic where Bitcoin, even as a cultural whole, causes you to focus on quality with a low time preference. So even the consumer base is starting to ask questions of what's healthiest for my family, which is reframing the whole marketplace. But yeah, I'd like to hear their thoughts, and I'll tie it off. Poof, talk and stick to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My first thoughts went immediately to okay, the book. See, what is the book called? The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry, which I recommend anybody read, whether you're a farmer or not. But he called what's happening today the consolidation, the land being used as a store of value, the small family farm, which in my opinion is the backbone of a society, is getting snuffed out. It's getting suffocated. It's getting choked in the fiat standard. He called that back in the 70s. Yeah, that I guess the farmers, made the decisions, as a fiat standard kind of gripped on the necks of farmers. Over the years, the least efficient dropped out as time went on, and efficient as far as their lifestyle. And if you kind of there's a whole thing you can learn from just seeing which farmers have dropped out in the 80s, the 90s, today, or the OOs, and now the 2010 and on. But the farmers that are surviving, their lifestyle is very, very simple. It's so I guess, but there is successful regenerative farmers today, very successful. So my answer to that would be yes, it is. As a full, as a full industry being across the board, it would take a society that not is food curious. If you have a society that is 100% okay with fiat food and doesn't want to know if their food was raised ethically and it's healthy and it's regenerating the soil, then my answer would be no. But the shift is happening. People are digging into that, especially when you come to the grocery store and there's no food there. It makes you realize, wait a minute, where does this come from? Maybe I should get closer to the food supply. And so my answer to that would be in a complete fiat standard with nobody asking those questions, no. But in today's society, with people starting to answer those, ask those questions, yes, I believe that is you could do that in a fiat standard. Although um, if you just keep fiat on your balance sheet, I would say yes, but it's much more tricky, and you have to have a very long time preference view, because the first 4 or 5 years, and Gabe Brown talks of this too. The first 4 or 5 years of the transition is the roughest. You have to pull through that, and then because you're coming from a soil or a dirt that's addicted to injections, and then you're transitioning to a operation that is more diverse, because you're not just doing cash crops. So the first 4 years is very tough to as you transition. But yeah, my answer would be like I stated earlier. You'd have to have a society asking questions of where does my food come from for a regenerative for farmers to be able to make the switch, I guess. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, John, I think that so from a farmer perspective, Bitcoin is a huge accelerant. Okay, as both these guys mentioned, there are farmers out here doing it well, making a better living, selling direct to consumers. But it's because they've captured that whole ecosystem. Okay, they're not taking their animal to auction, selling it to the highest bidder there, which then goes into the system of processing and to retailers. They're capturing that entire market and selling direct to consumer, and that's how it's working for them. From a consumer perspective, I think that Bitcoin adoption is necessary for the decentralized scaling, I'll call it, of regenerative agriculture to really happen. So low tide preference just changes your value preference, right? And right now, we obviously have people buying these products who are choosing to have a lower time preference. They're choosing to value their health, for example, over the cost of the product. But in my work, where I see when this gets difficult is when times get harder or the economy tanks a little bit, and all of a sudden people's choices change and they don't want to spend that extra couple dollars on a quality steak or better food. They'll just go to the grocery store and buy what's cheap again. So I think that from a consumer perspective, like, Bitcoin comes in as this necessary piece, and this is one of the reasons I got so excited about it when I found out about it, because it changes the conversation. It takes regenerative farming out of these little pockets that are just kind of happening where there's an affluent market and people are willing to pay for the product, and it allows it to be something that is basically for everyone. Okay, if we're all holding Bitcoin on our personal balance sheets, and the value of that is increasing, and we're also interested in the long-term benefits of this food on our health, it changes what we're willing to pay for. And then that adoption continues to fuel the adoption of the growth of farmers, booting up farms, regenerating more soil. So it's an accelerant for farmers, and I feel like it's just a necessary piece for Bitcoin adoption is a necessary piece for this to really take off on a large scale from the consumer perspective.
Okay, I have an interesting answer here. If we define fiat as just kind of your day-to-day mispricing of the current marketplace, it is possible to do regenerative agriculture now, while difficult. I'll circle back to that. If we define fiat as the entire complex of state structure of centralized authority connected to money printing, I'd say no, it's impossible. Centralized authority, whether communism, socialism, whatever, it always leads to large-scale famine. There's stories of this back in China where one of the emperors was annoyed by one of the birds eating too many of the fruit coming off of one of his crops. And so they tried to wipe out systematically a bunch of these birds who they thought were hurting their efficiency. And when they did this, a couple years later, they had this giant famine of a bunch of bugs that the birds were helping keep under control, wiped out the entire crop, and a bunch of people starved across the nation. Or another instance, like when centralized butchering was first installed, I think it was in Europe. I read a tweet about this. If anybody saw that tweet, I'd love to find it again. I didn't bookmark it. But they went from having local processors to regulated centralized processors, thinking that it was going to be healthier using these highly qualified inspectors and pristine facilities. But what ended up happening when they first instituted the system was you had to ship the cow so far away from home that you put more stress on the animals. And that animal stress actually caused a pandemic of animal disease that caused all sorts of problems that you didn't have with the local processors, even if they weren't near as pristine. So the fiat system enables this stupidity at scale. So currently in regenerative ag, we're having to compete with the monetization of land prices, but this is accelerating with all sorts of other factors. For example, your average grazing lease in the US, and Tim, you can confirm this for me, I think it's in the like $20 to $40 per acre per year range. Last time I looked it up. Was that correct,
You
Tim?
got it.
Go ahead. Okay. There's solar panel companies going all over the country making bids on farmland. They're bidding anywhere between like $300 to $3,000 per acre per year. My local landlord I lease land from over here in Virginia, she got two offers. One was $800 per acre per year. One was $1,200 per acre per year. That entire marketplace that is out competing farmers for land by a factor of 10 or 100x is a completely fake market based upon subsidies of money printing. In a climate like that, how do you, that are actually respecting efficiency and energy of the soil, of the calories of food production, all the way through quality of what the consumer product is, all the way at the end of the chain, how do you compete? It's a lie. It's a lie of information of what's most efficient at a 10 or 100x scale of what that land should be being used for. Until we take away the power of them to lie to the marketplace so that our truth can actually propagate into the market as a whole for the consumer to hear what's best, I don't think we can compete with that. Not as it's accelerating into these more corrupted ESG markets.
So it sounds like, it's possible right now, but the more the fiat unwind occurs, absent Bitcoin, the more difficult it would be for Regen Ag to compete in this just highly subsidized interventionist sort of market. And that leads me to a question that, again, I'm sure you've all encountered this, so it'd be interesting to hear from you all on this. But we're all familiar with using waste gas to mine Bitcoin, right? And approaching these energy producers and saying, hey, you're flaring gas, it's a waste product, it's a liability to you in some way. Why don't we cap it, use it to monetize it, and you can actually make money from it and avoid whatever bad press or regulations or whatever come with your existing practice. And so it's kind of a layup, right? Like it's a kind of a no-brainer for energy providers. Yes, they have to understand Bitcoin and get the value prop and not think it's for drugs and bad guys and stuff, but it's a fairly easy sell. Are there any layups in this domain where you can approach farmers that farm in the fiat way, let's say, or normally in whatever way, and there's some element of this whole thing that we've been talking about and that you've all in your own ways been working on, other than putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And I'll accept that as an answer from everybody. But is there another layup that's like easy to get, easy to implement, and can actually be that little foot in the door that instigates a broader change, following on from that in the not too distant future?
So I would start answering that, which is going back to the question where we were at before, is there's all sorts of insane things regenerative farmers currently have to do in order to survive in the broken fiat system as it is. Because you're trying to live with a low time preference in a high time preference environment. Tim's can speak to this with his family, but like his dad essentially was fighting the financialization by day trading cattle. He would buy cattle that were mispriced in the market because of the fluctuations. Some of them wouldn't be the healthiest. He'd bring them to his farm, he'd shape them up, and then when that cattle breed or whatever particular facets of that animal were overpriced, he'd sell them in. So he was forced to play this high time preference trading game in order to make the margins for doing the low time preference effort for his soil he wanted to do. And there's all sorts of ways that kind of the permaculture mindset is finding waste streams to maximize your circular economy internally to maximize efficiency of production. Like Greg Judy attacked this problem by saying, okay, my land's monetizing. So he went and knocked on the doors of local hunters who had their wealthy people had these big recreational like hunting properties. And he said, like, hey, like you guys have to spend all this effort coming out and maintaining your land. You have to use tractors to keep the trails clear. You're burning all this fuel and time. And I'd love to come manage your land for you. I'll use my cows as a tool. I'll do regenerative agriculture on the property. I'll restore ecosystems, bring back and strengthen the wildlife and the birds. The deer populations, everything will get stronger for your hunting, but I'll make money on it during the process. So it was finally a place where they had aligned incentives, right? Because the recreational people hunting these land, they don't really care about the monetary productivity nominally. They just want this place to be beautiful, and they have a lower time preference of wanting it to produce quality hunting with these good animals of being out there, being able to eat all the forage and grow to these large sizes, but also have the diversity of wildlife that supports these strong ecosystems to bring things that are better, like quail hunting and some of these more rare bird breeds. Which is also, side note, hunters are some of the best conservationists out there. They have aligned incentives for the long time preference. So you've been forced to play these. How do you play these as it's accelerating into this crazy cantillionaire type effect in the world and get everyone else at markets and stuff? It's like you got to financialize the farm somehow and play the same games everybody else is doing, which sucks because you're not just measuring things based upon pure productive efficiency and efforts. Like Tim and I are working on this program for regenerative farmers. We're going to come in and help them do herd shares. So rather than carrying a large proportion of your balance sheet as a farmer in animal wealth, or like we've talked about, like what Greg Judy just did of carrying the balance sheet of the farmer in land wealth, neither of which they kind of can somewhat keep up with inflation depending upon the regulatory environment and the way the monopolies are putting pressure on the animal. But say we as consumers, we want secure food supplies. So lock in food security for me. So if the shelves go empty, JPS has a plant burned down or the truckers go on strike, and I have access to animals at a local farm, they'll help me family fed. That to me has greater value than just the current monetary measure. So you're overriding miscommunication in the marketplace because monetary miscommunication always breakdowns of scarcity and just not having access to product, right? So it's enabling balancing of that desire and opportunity cost with the opportunity cost of the farmer. So say you allow your customers to carry some of the animal wealth, they have a balanced opportunity cost of greater security. You have a balanced opportunity cost of now you can take that value and carry it somewhere else that can outpace the cantillionaires. So you, instead of carrying like 60, 70, 80% of your value in animals, can carry it in Bitcoin, which you said don't just say Bitcoin, but it's a creative play here that lets you and your consumer balance together your mutual needs so that both of you can have the security of playing the game where it most makes sense. The consumer needs security you need the ability to have something that outruns inflation at a fast enough pace. That way, your farm remains capitalized for future investments and productivity where you need it, whether it's more fencing, more animals, or whatever. I'll hand that one to Tim next.
Yeah, I don't think, John, that there's kind of a one-to-one correlation between what Bitcoin miners can do with, in the energy markets, energy space with captured gas. The one thing that's a little bit different here is that they're with land in the United States and Canada. There's a lot of generational pride in family land, and it does hurt a farmer that has to sell his family's property. If it's been in your family for several generations, it's a big deal to sell that land. And so the real value proposition to someone who doesn't own land but wants to farm regeneratively is coming to these folks and setting up the kinds of arrangements that Joel is talking about. I care for your property. I increase its productive capacity. You'll see more wildlife. The land will look good. To a lot of landowners, you're not paying them anything necessarily. It could be a very minimal lease, but it could also be just trading the value of your work on their land for your use of the land. That's actually a pretty compelling value proposition to folks, because all of a sudden the land is being used. It's being put into, if it hasn't been in agricultural production for the last several years, it's now being put back into an agricultural tax bracket, which is helpful for them, and it keeps the land in their family. And so it's basically a win-win in that scenario. It's not necessarily a way for them to make a bunch of money off of the work that you're doing, but you can offer them food security and basically a heritage that you're taking care of for their family.
Tim, that's super interesting, and I'd never considered it before. I mean, I had considered, and I think we all have, just how detached modern people have become from the land that sustains them. And some of us feel it in varying ways and to different degrees. It's certainly something that I've always yearned to shore up or eliminate, right? Like I want to build back that connection to the land that sustains me and that I live on and stuff, right? The antithesis would be living in like a concrete jungle, right? Like 10 million people and high rises and concrete roads and all that stuff. But I never thought about the pride aspect of that, but I can imagine it, right? I mean, if you've been working a land your entire life, not only has it been sustaining you, but you've been putting your work and your effort and your time into it, and you're considering every little detail, and you develop a relationship where you can see how it responds to your behavior. And it's I hadn't looked at it that way, but I can see that, and I yearn for that. I want that in my future and our collective futures, to be able to at least have that should we want it. And it's interesting to hear you say that it's in itself, that piece of pride could be an incentive for playing on that, or not playing on that pride, but appealing to that pride could be a way to open farmers' minds up to other possibilities that would allow them to maintain their relationship with the land that they've been living off of and taking care of.
Yeah, that's one of the things that broke when you were forced to play these high tie preference games as a farmer, as you had to divorce yourself from your pride and love for your land just to stay afloat and not go bankrupt. So it had this sensation of almost guilt of like, you're violating the things you believe in most in order to keep your family afloat and keep feeding them, which has just broken the spirit of farmers, which I think is one of the reasons we have a hard time pulling like multi-generational mainstream like industrial farmers into the hope of the way that regenerative agriculture fixes things. But I'd love to hand this off to Poof, because I'm sure he has tons of beautiful things to add to this story in particular.
Well, so in my area here, I don't have much to add besides just adding to the pride of owning, a multi-generational farm. So for the first time, the farm I grew up on, just 2 months ago, the cows were sold, and that's been in our the farm is still in our family's name, but the cows, it's been a dairy farm. We've been milking cows for 3 generations, and so this is the first generation now that the milking the dairy cows were sold, and so that's something to work through. but it's still the farm in whole is still in our name. But that's very much there's definitely a lot of pride. Something that does break my heart is hearing story after story of owners, farmers that none of the children are interested. They don't want anything to do with the farm, and so the farm gets all lotted up and sold to a giant mega farmer. So that very much I seen it in my around here in this area. There was dairy farms just all over this area, northern Indiana, southern Michigan, and just continually every week there's a farm somewhere it's getting sold off. My brother-in-law operates the farm sales, so I get first-hand sight into that. It breaks my heart, but if you dig into it a little bit, it's because of the fiat squeeze. I call the dairy farming on a small scale. It's kind of like a mosh pit of inflation. Everything from your gloves to your shoes to skid loaders to tractors, everything increased in price. If you look at the price scale over the last 30, 40 years, it's just crazy that it kept honing in down on farmers, and just one by one they left the race. But anyway, one I don't have much to add to that besides just I've witnessed that, and it breaks my heart, and that's why the operation that I used to work for, I have no desire to work there anymore, because it was more I was on the Walmart taking out the little mom and pop stores side of it. And so when I met you, Joel, and an opportunity to maybe switch this around, I was very delighted to do that. Um, One question I have for you, Tim, is, or Joel, maybe on this as well. Is there the cover crop subsidy? How is that structured? Something that I've wanted to work, or a thought that I had was, so right now I live in an area where there's big mega farmers all around me, and what they do is they plant cover crop, but then they spray it with glyphosate and till it up and replant in the spring. I didn't know, is there have you heard of anybody that would come in with cows and graze that cover crop, because it's a nice cover crop, and then they come in and spray it, and it kills it off. I didn't know. Have you heard of anybody grazing cows on that cover crop instead of just spraying it? Tim or Joel?
I can answer that real quick, Poof. Yeah, it depends on what the cover crop is. I come in and do fall grazing on it. Um, I just had a thought, just kind of to maybe wrap this topic up. That one of the really compelling pieces to Bitcoin that really helped me put kind of some of the puzzle pieces together was this idea that, like, in agriculture, we're all about energy production. It's Joel mentioned this as kind of like this caloric energy that we need for the animals that sustains us in the end. So we're all about this energy production, and Bitcoin allows us to then take that energy production. Okay, we do this in every aspect of our lives, but it's just easier to see with agriculture. We produce something. We have this tendency and this desire to preserve it, and so in Bitcoin we can actually preserve the productive work of our hands, um, all because of this energy money. And so I feel like the reason that so many Bitcoiners are so interested in regenerative agriculture at this point, aside from a lot of the political atmosphere that we live in, is this idea that, we want to produce energy that feeds and sustains us. We want to use an energy money. It's kind of tied to, like, just kind of a primal aspect of our nature as human beings. And so it's a natural progression for someone to come into energy money and then all of a sudden want to be producing the energy that sustains themselves. I just thought I would tie that up. It's just, that was a big piece of it for me that helped me really, like, help things click for me.
Yeah, if we could pull the string on that one for a second, Tim, because obviously what we're talking about is how understanding Bitcoin allows you to see how it can restructure the incentives and all the other bullshit in this industry, such and because there's such a emotional attachment by farmers to the land, and it's so devastating when they have to sell it, or when they're out competed, or when they're bought out, or when they're pushed out, or whatever. presumably that means there's a tremendous demand to try to reverse that, try to stop that. And as we've been discussing, that's what Bitcoin does, but it requires you to see, at least to some degree, how that process takes place. And so I know you've all respectively spoken to either family members, friends, public speaking. Untapped, you said you were in Omaha recently speaking to a group of 40 people. Like, have you guys found there's a particularly effective way of communicating? Because it's not obvious, right? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Internet money can fix the farming problem. They seem like they're entirely different universes. Is there a particular way that you found most effective at communicating that how Bitcoin can ameliorate their situation and how they can leverage it to get more of what they want and resist, the unwanted consequences of the current environment?
I missed the last 10 seconds of that because your service is pretty bad. But I think I got the question.
Sorry.
Can you repeat the last 10 if you want?
Yeah. It was just, has there been a particular argument, framing, explanation that you guys have found particularly effective at getting people to bridge the gap between, you know, uh, crazy internet money and improving their situation vis-a-vis their farming operations and resisting the encroachment and the nonsense coming from the fiat domain and having to sell their land and all that kind of stuff? Like, has there been a particular argument that they've been receptive to that helps accelerate their understanding of the benefits of Bitcoin in their operations?
So crazily, the first time I really tried leveraging this as hard as I did was the Omaha conference. But I used proof of work with the farmers and environmental people. And the way I did it was I approached it at first. I defined what is money, right? Money is the communication mechanism, like we were just talking about earlier in the spaces. And then I tied proof of work as the thing that clarifies the communication because it's enabling the communication to have to be grounded in reality. It's forcing a justice where if you disconnect it from reality, your opportunity cost is swift and immediate, and the market finds out. So you learn across the market as a whole to stay grounded to what's actually efficient, which makes you put pure signal into the system. That's been remarkably effective. It's like flipping the whole FUD about energy with proof of work on its head because the people that seem to care about the energy most, it makes it a pro rather than a con.
I'm almost shocked that people get it when you say it like that, because of course I agree with you and I think it's extremely well put, but I'm impressed that people can hear what you just said and kind of get it and not along with it, because it's so kind of foreign to what we've understood about money and these, all these concepts that you're putting together to explain this.
Yeah, when you reference how bad the miscommunication is, you can easily get into a second you get kickback. It's like they already know this is just completely fucked and broken. It's like, how did we end up here where I'm destroying my own land, using cows that are so sick on grass they can't even breathe, that like feeding them junk food and they're full of all these polyunsaturated fats that are bad for human health? It's like, this is a horrible place I never wanted to end up, and I feel like I just perpetually keep walking here. And so when they give pushback on the miscommunication, you just take the deeper dive on one of the facets. Like, okay, this miscommunication that caused problem A, B, and C that you personally care about, this came from broken money here that made you think this that was never actually real to start with. And I'm sorry, buddy, but you got tricked. And then they get irate. Like, I'm just so tired of being tricked. I want to build my life on truth again so I can collaborate with the people I care about to make the world better. And it's like, okay, well, now we need a way to communicate at scale that we can't trick each other. How do we do that? Well, the answer to that is just simply grounded in energy. It's proof of work. We need it to be connected thermodynamically to physics and reality. That is the mechanism that enforces truth. Once you make that jump to that's the only way without a centralized authority that makes stupid decisions to enforce truth in the ecosystem, you get pretty quickly to realizing that this is what's going to make us efficient to where we steward our resources better rather than waste them.
Yeah, John, I've got not too much to add to that other than just what everything Untapped has summarized there. It allows you to have the conversation not in an accusatory way with somebody like, you've got these problems, you've been farming wrong for years, here's how you should do it right. It's looking at the problem together. So you can, if you identify the problem, then all of a sudden you're both working on a solution to fix the problem together. A farmer is as a small business owner, basically is the person that's farthest from the money levers as possible, and so they understand the effects, and they know exactly what you're talking about as soon as you bring up the perverse incentives in farming.
And one thing about in the farming industry is something that I've noticed now that I've went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. What is money and how the fiat standard is structured? In '08, there was bailouts, mistakes were made, and there was bailouts. Well, in farming, especially with raising cattle, you make a mistake, you pay. There's consequences for your actions, and so yeah, the whole proof of work that makes sense. I do the work. I spend the extra time cleaning, water tanks and all that with this group of cattle, and I get a better gain and all that. Just basically, they're very much familiar with actions and consequences, and that's not in the fiat standard, in the hedge fund world, et cetera. That they don't understand that. It's, hey, where's my bailout? That the farmers don't operate with that ethos.
That's such a good point, man. This group and of course, it makes sense, right? That this people would just have a far better intuitive appreciation for the value and necessity of work, right? Whereas, as you say, the banker on Wall Street is far more disconnected from that than someone who's, working with their hands and connected to they see the exact inputs that they put in to the land, what happens as a result of those inputs, and then what comes out as a result. I mean, it makes total sense. So I can see why that's a lot more intuitive. Untapped, unless you had anything to add to that, I wanted to ask you guys a question that's somewhat unrelated, but perhaps more relevant to
I
Bitcoiners.
definitely got something I can add.
Go for it. I'll save the question.
Okay, so an interesting thing about our current world, I think about the Jordan Peterson thing about cleaning your room a lot. Like the way we fix the world is you fix your backyard, you take responsibility for what's right beside you, and to make it more beautiful. And one of the frustrations farmers feel is the problems exist locally, and this is true of every industry, not just farming. The problems exist locally, but they have to be solved globally because we have this giant global black hole due to this whole fiat monster and state authority structure that every time you solve your local problem, it's like spitting into the wind and it just sucks all the energy and oxygen out of the room and it just doesn't do any good. So, with Bitcoin, to kind of tie that whole part of the conversation full circle, it enables you to fall in love with that process of working again because now you no longer feel like the black hole is consuming your local solutions. It's a global strategy that actually is effective enough to give you cover and leverage on the ground as a little guy to solve problems in a granular way.
God, I love that. That's so great. And it actually is a perfect lead into what I was going to ask. And so it's funny, when we were kids, we probably saw, you may get some thunder sounds coming from my mic in the next few minutes. But when we were kids, you watch like sci-fi movies, right? Like The Fifth Element, and it's all like flying cars and concrete and steel and all that kind of stuff. And what seems to be the case is like, many of us who are most into Bitcoin and most kind of thinking about the future and future oriented, I think it does seem like an element of our future and the ambitions that we have for it is going to be a type of archaic revival where, like, I think many of us, my impression from speaking with a lot of people in the space is that there is a yearning to get back to the land in some capacity, facilitated by technology, right? Like Bitcoin and like satellite internet and whatever the hell else to make it, efficient and convenient and better in broadly speaking. But it does seem like that's something that we want. And, this is tied up in the Citadel memes Bitcoiners often talk about. What do you think? But one of the things about farming is that obviously you're tethered to the location that you're in, right? And we often talk about in the space as well, the sovereign individual thesis, where during this era of transition, let's call it, being adaptable is highly advantageous to maneuvering the jurisdictional challenges and changes that occur. Farming, obviously, you don't have that luxury because it's in one place, the land, the cattle, etc. How do you guys see that issue? Is it a problem? What would you say to Bitcoiners that are confronting that question and not sure how to answer it?
That's a good question, John. Because I mean, we're living in this society where we're in monetary reset, right? And then mobility really matters. I think part of the reason that I feel so called to this mission of helping plebs get on the land and rebuild the soil and secure food chains is because in some ways, like this is the tip of the spear. You can have all the nominal value in the world, but somebody has to be productive somewhere. And the soil is your real first productive asset for civilization. It produces the food, and then the efficiency of food production that we could feed to society is what buys you the time for everybody else to invest their time doing other things. And that's where the whole economy grounds and gets created, because now you have freedom to do what other people do best and scale out from there into all of what kind of is division of labor in the modernized world, right? So we have to have people who are standing at the face of that battle and just saying, I'm going to have a low time preference. I'm going to die on the soil, and I'm going to try to be tactically smart about making sure I can outlast monetary reset, whether by doing so with like a little bit of obfuscation where they don't find us, or building strong networks and communities that give us enough leverage and covering that we don't get forced to go to somewhere that treats us better because we have enough power to stand where we are. I keep talking about this thesis that I've been developing, and it's the three core technologies of humanity. First, you got language. It's the ability to communicate with each other, right? So that gives you a greater reach as a human being. Then you got fire, the ability to harness energy, which is leverage. It's like depth of your roots. So language is like the spread of your branches, and then energy harnessing is like the depth of your roots to accomplish more of your desire, because you can harness more than just your intrinsic power. You have power of things you have the ability to put to work for you. But money is kind of a fusion of those two. It's something that brings together that reach and that depth. And Bitcoin grounds them both because it puts us in a world where we finally can play these games at this scale to actually win these battles, because we have both depth of power and reach collaboratively to solve these granular problems on the ground without getting stomped out by these state authorities and everything that's so much bigger than us. And that's really what I'm trying to pull together with my mission with the Untapped Growth. And Poof and Tim are both working with me to help pull it off, of enabling this to be successful at scale by maximizing what's possible with this reach of connectivity and depth of power and leverage through the covering that Bitcoin enables us to have.
Yeah, John, the only thing that I would add to that, obviously, I love that thesis, and I'm right there with that, spearhead analogy. You just kind of see these farms all across the country or the world as just basically nodes, for lack of a better term or analogy, and places where folks can just say, no, I'm standing here. And that's kind of my vision for what this is. Like, I want my family to be rooted and grounded in a place, and I want that kind of heritage. And so just being able to say, no, this is where I'm making my stand, and doing my best to opt out at every layer, using Bitcoin, and being able to just say, this is where I'm going to build, and I'm going to, trust and have faith that I can build here and leave a heritage for my children. And that's what these regenerative farms and regenerative agriculture is really all about. To me, is just taking a stand where we're at, and working faithfully with what we have in front of us, and basically increasing the productive value and capacity of the land, as a gift to our children's children.
I don't have much to add to that, besides if you are looking to move into getting or buying a farm, as a Bitcoiner, adding value to a deep community That, and what I mean by deep community is a community that's been okay, so the community I'm in, we have we host our own butcherings, etc. As a small community, uh, having a community that we've been doing that for 30 years, tapping into a community and adding value to a community like that, when you do relocate, is powerful, and it's very much, in my opinion, as the nation state loses its power, how will that, how the shattering of that power, how will the pieces lay? We don't know. We can navigate, but being in a small, adding value to a small community is, or a strong small community is I guess that's my bet, and that's where I'm going to have my family through this, and that would be that would be my 2 cents on it, I guess.
Poof, if I could just ask you a follow-up question about that, because this idea of butchering or slaughtering the animal is very interesting to me, because again, I think it goes back to that idea where we've been detached from the land, and we've been detached from the reverence that we ought to have for the life that sustains us. Ultimately, whether it's animal or plant life, but I think all of us here sustain ourselves on animal life. And much as I, much as it would be extremely difficult for me to be involved in that process, it's something that I know I need to be involved in the future. I feel I don't feel right not being involved in it, and I'm just wondering what it looks like for you, as you just mentioned it, where it happens. I presume it's not even permitted in a lot of places. I have to imagine, though. Perhaps I'm incorrect on that assumption, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that process or ritual is like for you.
So it's something that I grew up in. My grandpa started this, and it started out as a family. I come from a big family, and so it started as a family operation, and then it moved on to a community, and so it's kind of open to the community, for anybody that wants to uh, to help out. As far as permitting, yeah, we do have that structured, that it's okay, as far as how we have that set up. But I kind of am like a fish in water, and another fish swims by and says, "How's the water?" And then I'm like, "Hey, what's water?" As a fish, I'm kind of that fish. I'm starting to realize, this isn't normal life, and so I'm still developing my own. I get, it's kind of hard if you've always had that lifestyle, to not have it. Yeah. Anyway, it's kind of hard for me to explain. I'm afraid I won't answer what you're asking, but it very much, working together as a community. Sometimes it's 25 to 30 pigs that we would butcher, and we do have some beef butcherings as well. That's kind of faded out more so just on the pigs. And so when we do that, it I can't explain it. At the end of the day, it's the effort everybody puts in, the respect that's shown to the, we're blessed with this much meat, all that. It's just a very, very fulfilling experience, that I wish everybody could experience. And I've tweeted this before. I really wish, and I think this is some of the craziness that we see in society today. I believe it stems from being removed from the energy that we intake, and being responsible for the energy that we consume. So this chicken or this pig or this cow died. It was harvested, and now what am I going to do with the energy that I got from that cow? Is it going to be net positive to humanity? Is it going to be net negative? Am I going to add value to my neighbor? That is very huge, and I believe that's the core. We've got away from that, and I kind of theorize that if we would get back to that, we'd see some of this you fill in the blank. Some, we just things that at the Met Gala, for instance, those just things like that. I don't think we'd see quite the atrocities that we see today if we would have stayed. If the and again back to the how Wendell Berry predicted it in 1970, if we'd have stayed connected as a small family farms across America, thousands of them, and stayed to strong communities, I don't think we'd see some of the atrocities that we see today.
Totally agree.
I'd love to speak to this one, John, as somebody who's been a brother with Poof, kind of living beside me in the battle for a little while. He may describe himself as kind of a fish realizing he's been in water, of having these experiences that aren't normal for the rest of us, not having grown up in those worlds. When we go through this process of butchering, it's like you're integrating into the existence of this animal whose life is being given to you, and learning to partner with the gratitude and honor of that. And like you think about the Native Americans that used to wait for an animal they were hunting to kind of present and give themselves to them, right? And then it was the blessing of that life. You partook of that life, have a commitment to living in a way that was worthy of that gift. I've experienced this really strongly with Poof, where I don't think he realizes it, but he's very strongly grounded as a man that few people I interact with are. He's got a very quick insight that doesn't get pulled around very much away from what's actually going on with people around him. It's just no nonsense ability just to pierce through it and understand what the realness is beneath. I think a lot about how wherever you compromise as a person becomes something that you're blind to. And our whole society right now is just built on compromise. I mean, fiat incentivizes compromise. And the deeper you have integration as a human into like existence of your own personal self, but into everything else you touch as well, the less easy you are to be tricked. And the more you can see with clarity and depth and vision of distance into what's really happening. And I doubt Poof even realizes he has this, but as he's been working with me on the teams of some of the stuff that I'm trying to build, he doesn't get shaken like some of the other guys I build with if something kind of gets thrown into mix that's messy, because he has that ability to see where that integration of honor lies at an instinctual level. I think some of that comes from this integration of life itself, where he's grown up butchering animals. I don't think those are disconnected.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to comment on that, I have some thoughts, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have much.
Well, I
I
guess
don't have much to add to that. Again, I'm still realizing how it's not normal. And I've had somebody DM me that has told me, I posted a picture of me and my boys out choring, feeding the cows, and DM me and said they love it, and share more of that, and just to know that that's not normal. And so I'm still realizing that that I the and so it's actually a challenge on me, or a responsibility on myself. Okay, so I was brought up with this, like this, and in a deep, in a deep community. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to extend it? What am I going to do with that? So that is the more I realize how not normal the way I was growing up, butchering animals on a farm, etc. Now the more, okay, how am I going to utilize that, and and forecast it forward, and establish that localism into my boys. That's kind of the challenge that I take from that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And to what you and what Untapped were saying about just, and I think this probably characterizes part of the truth seeking that a lot of Bitcoiners end up embodying, is, to use Untapped's terminology, like, you seek that fuller integration with all the things that you do, the things that you rely upon, the things that help you actualize yourself, the things that that you're striving for in your ambition. like you want to remove the illusion, right? You want to see and engage with as much clarity and as much truth as possible. And I think that's why, like, we see this consistent approach or philosophy that Bitcoiners seem to have, regardless of where their eyes may fall, whether it's on finance or lifestyle or health or values or relationships. Like, there seems to be a emerging consistency among all of them, and I think it has to do with that. And Poof, to your point, like, that's one of the reasons why I want that in my life more, because you go into the grocery store at 5 p.m., take some stuff off the shelf, go home, cook it, watch Netflix, go to bed. Like, that kind of characterizes a lot of our lives, right? We're so disconnected from the sacrifice that was required for that sustenance, right? And if you were face to face with that sacrifice, so that you knew, because I don't want to, let's say, kill a cow. Like, I think animals are beautiful and I think they're amazing spirits and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't want to take their life. But if I was forced to, right, because I knew that was the best sustenance for me, well, then I'm much more confronted with the question, like, hey, man, that sacrifice just went to sustaining you. Now, what the fuck are you going to do with that opportunity, right? Like, what are you going to do with that blessing and that, yeah, that sacrifice that you just enacted for you? And I think the closer we are to that, the more it imbues our life with at least an imperative to determine meaning, if not meaning, just by default. But I think it inspires us to ask those questions about meaning, and hopefully uh, causes us to dig down more on what's really important, and what we end up choosing to use our life force for at the end of the day. And this is how this conversation, whether it starts in Bitcoin or regen ag or whatever, leads right down to the spiritual domain, right? And so it's so interesting to see how all this is interconnected.
Tim, have you felt like living closer to the soil and farming and growing up with the regenerative farm and the butchering has grounded you in your spirituality and life in a deeper way?
I think that, like, a little bit like Poof, when you grow up in something, it's hard to see outside of it, and it's hard to see different perspectives. The grounding aspect, I think, is real. So much of our culture doesn't believe that there is truth. We want to have kind of relative truth, and I think that just understanding some of those fundamental things, you know, like Poof, I grew up around a lot of death, and it sounds morbid. It sounds, in a sense, bad. But you see the entire cycle of life. Not only are you being part of, taking life when it's an animal's time to provide you sustenance, but you're also just seeing older animals die. You're seeing animals die of sickness. These kinds of things just, I think, help, those of us who grew up from a young age, help us realize that there's a finality. There are things that are just, I guess, fundamentally real, and death is one of those things. Sounds like a very morbid conversation, but it also helps you just ground you in truth, and wanting to seek and find that kind of truth, because you see finality is a real thing.
That's been so true for me with my experience, John, of both interacting with Tim and Poof, where in our modern society, everybody's just kind of drifting. And we have this arrogance because it's this, like, the whole quintillion effect. It's so pervasive in our society, we don't even realize it's there, but it incentivizes us to have to play these games of pandering to the people around us to make them think we're somebody, so we can maintain our connections to relationships that connect us to this monetary flow from the top. It's all a lifestyle based upon gaining value from politics and pandering. Versus Bitcoiners, like, we don't have to care about the pandering because it's a life based upon producing real value. And I feel like with Tim and Poof, they're both guys that have an innate humility connected to understanding the discipline of real truth objectively, that, like, when you make a mistake, it costs you. And that so relates to Bitcoin too, because that's one thing I feel like Bitcoin is teaching a lot of us young guys as we're growing into this new emergent world, that, like, opportunity cost is real and you have to take it seriously or you pay the price of it. And it's making us have this capacity to dream larger because we're humble enough to submit to things that are larger than us.
One quote that I love by Wendell Berry is, and I might butcher this, but I'll get the point across. It is one of the greatest deceptions mankind has ever accepted, is that toiling with nature for your energy is is below me, or it's a bothersome. And that I love that quote, because I 100% agree with that quote.
Can you say the quote again, Poof?
Yeah, so let me think of her a little bit. It is one of the greatest deceptions mankind has ever accepted, that toiling with nature is mundane, or something like that.
Got it. Yeah. Guys, I'm gonna have to shoot soon, and I can't wait to continue this conversation at the actual summit. It's I absolutely fucking love jamming with you guys. For people, and I'm one of them, that you know want to be more and more close to this. I don't know how to otherwise describe it. Like, I'm not ready to start a farm effectively, right? But this is definitely toward the top of a priority list of establishing greater sovereignty, greater closeness and stewardship of the land, greater food security, et cetera, et cetera. What would each of you suggest are like things that can be done now in advance of, a type of farm citadel or farm citadel collective in the future?
I think Untapped is going to have the very best answer here, but I think there's immediate concerns people have with political environment, and that would be my answer to that would be really get to know a local farmer, be willing to pay a premium for the product. If you're young, you have more time than money, get in and help. Be willing to trade time, do some kind of apprenticeship, just kind of learn some of the basic fundamentals of what it takes to care for livestock, what it takes to look at grass and understand when it's being overgrazed, undergrazed. Lots of awesome content on YouTube if folks want to jump into that. That would be my answer.
Yeah, I have that was literally exactly what I was going to say. For sure, tap into your local farmer. And yeah, exactly what Tim said. See your cows that you eat. Spend time with him. That, and then also read the book, "The Unsettling of America" by Wendell Berry. That is a very much recommended book. Yeah, I don't really have much more to add to that, besides, I guess, and your local farmer. How do I say this? He if you come in with a yeah, I don't have I'm not going to open that one. Just know your local farmer, and make sure you know where your source comes from, is what I would add.
I would say three things. First, kind of the spiritual component you've been leaning into, John. Consume your food with honor. Like, learn to be grateful for the sacrifices that underlie it. And then, in tandem to that, the second part is learn about the production of it, of the ways that it should be being done. That way, you can vote with your money to make the price signal clear, to incentivize it to be done the right way. And then third, I mean, this is kind of what my mission is what you're saying here. And this is the reason I keep pulling guys like Tim and Poof in with me, because I believe that regenerative agriculture, restoring the soil, cattle, and then farmers, I believe that soil and food chain, it's the tip of the spear of building a parallel economy, because soil is your first productive asset that enables all the others. And that we are, as farmers, are not capable of being mobile. So this game of the sovereign individual thesis of technology and Bitcoin increasing the cost of offense and decreasing the cost of defense, we as the farming plebs, we're going to be the tip of the spear of this. And we're going to have to test this out before it's really shaking its way through to really change the rules. And what I'm trying to build is a really cohesive strategy and network that's going to make that possible. And both Tim and Poof are working with me. They've been working with me for a while. I don't have time to get into the details too much now of all the different things I'm building. But when push comes to shove, we're doing this to make the plebs sovereign so that you have the fuck you ability when the state tries to come and leverage against us to stop our support of Bitcoin. That's taking away their power, right? That's stripping away their monopoly on violence and power of the money printer to maintain their power base over society. Our ability to keep the farmers strong at the tip of the spear is going to be what keeps the plebs strong, because you're going to be able to continue to eat. And that's the foundation of you being alive, to continue the resistance. So the best way to be a part of that also is just build relationships with the guys who are pushing that battle forward, like Tim and Poof, and stand with us as the battles get hot and be there to make sure that we can build this network to make this work.
Well said, man. And, you know, it's an absolute, I love what you guys are all building. It's always an absolute honor to be able to speak with you guys. And, you know, it's an honor to know you as well. I've got to pop out now for an hour. So I don't know if you guys are going to keep it rolling or not, but I'll pop back in when I'm done if it's still rolling. So thank you guys for the chat. And I look forward to continuing the discussion at the summit soon.
Hey, John, one more thing.
Thank you.
I'll shoot you a DM on the next butchering we have this winter, and if it works for you, we'd love to have you.
Man, I would love that. Yeah, hit me up.
Thank you, John, for the fantastic moderation. And yeah, we see each other at the Superb Summit. I think we have to wrap it up because it's becoming late here in Europe, and I think the brains are exploding from this amazing episode here. Really insightful and really inspiring. Thank you so much, all. We could go for maybe some questions if there are any. And yeah, if you want to join the Superb Summit next week, Tuesday, so in just 1 week, just hit this Superb Summit hashtag and you will find us.
I could stick around for a few minutes to take some questions. I don't know about Poof and Tim. I'm bummed John. I wanted to tell him thanks. I really appreciate all the support he's given for all we're doing. I love that guy in his heart, man. He's such a good add to the Bitcoin space. I guess we can just give people a chance, Bitcoin Club Malta, to see if they want to jump on stage and ask us anything.
Yep. My question would be why Bitcoiners tend to be more fulfilled and more happy in general. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, because they're people who are seeking integration with truth in their lives. That's the innate facet of energy money, as you're grounding yourself to reality itself and pursuing that above everything that's misinformation in the marketplace, but not just like marketplace of economy and businesses, but marketplace of relationships and community. What would you say to that one, Poof and Tim? Let's start with Poof.
I would say very much yes. I've met Bitcoiners in the wild, and I can strike up a conversation. We can talk for an hour, and as polarized as America is, and as everything is, it's super polarized. It's very easy to get into arguments. If you, or I've witnessed that, and because you're talking about red or blue, and I can randomly meet a Bitcoiner in the wild and talk for an hour, and not even talk red or blue. It's great. I absolutely love it. We are focusing on low time preference and making and trying to just low time preference and future building and grounded in reality. And it also helps see through some of the fiat fluff that gets thrown through the media. So I very much agree with that.
I think it has so much to do with a hope for the future, right? Not only are the productivity of my work is being saved in a way that will grow and increase in the future, that brings a tremendous amount of joy to what I'm doing today. There's a lot of fulfillment in that, but also just that going off of that future theme, building things together. It's both these other guys have said, and there's so much joy and collaboration, knowing that the future is brighter because we're working together.
So much so. And on that topic, I'm really grateful for you two, Tim and Booth. You guys have been such champions here as I've needed you guys help me do things. You guys have made me so much better by being around and doing this with me.
Okay, I think we've got one question here from Sat's Mind. Speak up.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Really appreciated the conversation. I've been interested in sustainable ag for, I don't know, over 10 years, and Bitcoin less long. So it's really cool for me to kind of experience this blending of the two. My question is around meat quality, and maybe not even just quality, but characteristics. So Americans, at least, we're accustomed to kind of choice or prime grade Angus or some kind of other um, cow, and prime, more marbled, ideally more desirable. Can you guys talk about if grass fed slash regenerative beef is there? If it's not, are we gonna like adjust to a different flavor? And then my second part of my question is around technology. And are there any new technologies or ideas that you guys see coming down the pike that would be able to help regenerative ranchers create, a beef that's more desirable by the market?
I'll take this first and I'll pass it off to Tim. Part of this is the issue of this fiat incentive that caused us to misbreed cattle. It is absolutely possible to raise really fatty, healthy cows that are like well marbled and have a lot of high body condition on just forage, even on real rough forage that doesn't have a lot of like fat and protein value to it. But we've been incentivized to breed all the wrong animals. That's something a lot of regenerative farmers are working on. The tip of the spear there is probably Johann Zeitzman. He's got some incredible cows that they're working with their genetic bloodlines. Also, the South Pole that Greg Judy's a big proponent of are doing a lot of work on that. There are slight differences as far as you got like a different fat profile, which is healthier because you're lower in the polyunsaturated, higher in the saturated, the healthy saturated fats. You got higher mineral content typically in grass fed, so it's got a deeper flavor. It's more akin to something that's dry aged versus something that's kind of more bland, like a lot of grain fed stuff is. But Tim, I'll let you hand off and polish off that question.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a different flavor profile. Exactly what Untapped was saying, just with fat. There's a lot of work too going into. So one thing, grass-fed beef can be some of the best beef you've ever had, and it can be some of the worst beef you've ever had. And a lot of it comes down to kind of the last several months of the process, where you do want to get them onto a kind of a higher protein diet, which can all be done through forages. But it's going to take a little bit of extra care and work. And some of it just comes down to the timing at the time of the year when those animals are getting to finish, which just goes back to when you're calving at the beginning, when those calves are being born to start with. Just finishing them out on high protein grass that allows them to put on that marbling, put on that last little layer of fat that's going to really enhance the flavor. And so it just, again, get to know your farmer. All these guys are kind of growing in this space, learning how to do it better. And it's only going to improve as we collaborate together and learn what works in different climates and different geographies, and just make it a better product.
Yeah, that was very well put, Tim. It can be the best and the worst. I've had both. I've had some really, really good, and I've had some that had no taste. And I think, yeah, as we collaborate more, trailblaze this way as of finishing, grass fed, we'll get there. That the taste of grass fed will be and marbling as we breed and collaborate as far as finishing on this grass or that grass. Yeah, but one thing I will add is something that contributes to the worst flavoring is if they are, the timing is wrong and it's on a grass that was very recently switched from a strip mining operation, with that's addicted to inputs, because you don't have a live soil food web build up, and so therefore your grass will not be as fatty and you won't have as good of a diet for the cows. So there, like Tim said, it can be the best or the worst. and there's a lot of variables. Just because it's grass fed won't mean that it's going to be the best flavor because of that. But as we collaborate and keep going, I'm excited for that.
To answer the technology question, the real technology is just going back to the wisdom of how it should be done. As Poof's saying, the better your soil, the better your grass, the better your beef. And also the genetics, it's really hard to overstate how much of an impact that has. And a lot of the regenerative grazing movement is not focused much on genetics so far. As those are getting more attention with a low time preference and start to actually be rewarded by the incentives of what consumers are spending their money on, that'll get better and better and better. But I mean, I don't want to feel like we're underselling it either. I love grass-fed beef, and a lot of times you get these slower finishing animals that are a part of grass-fed operations like my Woods or the Highlands, and there's some incredible flavor tender animals. They're much better than what you get from most feedlot operations in the grocery store, even just now. So like when we talk about improving quality, it's, in my opinion, most cases going for something that's already better than your average grocery store meat and taking that to the next level of what we as guys who are in the industry know is actually possible.
I have a few chefs that are that I had conversations with. So right away I decided, okay, let's go talk to chefs, and that's exactly what they told me. That they've been they basically they didn't know the farmer of the meat they buy, and so and that's a big window of opportunity that I'm hoping to fill someday. But their experience has been that some like Tim said, can be the best or the worst, and so but these chefs did say that they would go for a corn-fed finish, but this is just going to the store and purchasing it. My goal is here in the next few years is to supply them and them choosing my meat, not because it's grass-fed, but because it's better. And it's going to happen, but we'll get there. But yeah, collaboration and working together is going to be the key for this.
Thanks for the answers, guys. That's makes me excited to go and try different breeds. There's someone that does Highland cattle near where I live, so I should check that out. If I could ask one more question, that'd be awesome. So John asked earlier around your opinions if regenerative ranching could take off within the fiat system. And one thing that I never heard anybody address was regulation. And I know that USDA regulation makes it extremely expensive and is a very centralizing force on this. I guess Representative Macy's Prime Act and other efforts like that would help deregulate, so essentially allow slaughtering or processing of animals in not in USDA certified facilities, because I think that's where it gets expensive. Do you think it's worthwhile for Bitcoiners or just food activists in general to try to, agitate or change that regulation, or do you think that the system's just kind of so far gone because of the other characteristics of fiat, such as subsidies and whatnot?
I'd answer that based upon like kind of the margin of the value created there. You could buy us time by agitating and maybe like slowing down the anti-meat agenda. You could work with your farmers to kind of black market stuff, doing like what Poof does with his family of having butchering days and like the friends and families just taking meat home. And supporting Massey and stuff where you can, because that builds energy against the things that are trying to make it harder and harder for us. The chances of it working to get any of that changed at scale is pretty low. Like everything, it's just Bitcoin fixes this. You have to defund that whole structure, and then the whole regulatory thing will come down. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough one. I really don't have much more to add to that. I think it's going to come down in the near future politically with just us doing our thing and not talking too much about it and just making it happen. And then hoping longer term that the whole kind of system just collapses in on itself.
Yeah, I would say one thing is just going back to this low time preference of connectivity, because Bitcoin is almost something that creates globally connected potential for localizing relationships, even with people who aren't right next to you. It's really weird how it kind of runs both in parallel. So it's creating this dynamic where we're starting to have more and more trust of this deeper connectivity in the marketplace. Using that as your verification metrics of what you want to be purchasing, that and being informed yourself, even of the way things are butchered. I mean, even saying like trying to purchase things that are butchered with honor, we can be a part of the process. Um, that is a place where you can kind of lean into this with the farmers to help them maintain more value in the process and also secure them against this volatility in the industry. Like, for example, with the JBS plant having caught fire, I mean, back during Corona at the early phases, we had backlogs of almost 18 months at a lot of the major processors, to where if I had cows, and a bunch of my buddies had this issue, they had customers who the meat was short on the shelves. They wanted meat. The farmer had tons and tons of cows available, but he couldn't get into a processor for over a year to get his animal butchered to sell it to his friends and family. So normalizing this self butchering, or even learning how to do it yourself and going out to the farm and finding farmers who are comfortable with that as a part of the process, where you buy the animal live and then butcher it yourself and take it home, that can help build energy that makes the farmer more resilient against this chaos, and it'll help make the marketplace stronger for making it lean the way we want it to.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the Big Island of Hawaii, and I remember doing that very thing. And we were kind of like, younger guys with this old vet farmer who would also sell us raw milk. Um, and we would go and, we'd shoot the animal in the field and then basically hoist it over a branch and do the thing. It was really